Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to look at polynomials again, and we're going to look at factor by grouping. If you've completed the grade 10 polynomials video, common factor, today's lesson will be a lot easier for you. So we're going to look at factoring at polynomials that have 4 terms, and this is going to be a special type of factoring. Not all polynomials can be factored in this way, but the ones we are going to run into are. So here's what we do. We have our polynomial, and we divide it into 2 groups. So we put brackets around the first 2 items and brackets against the second group of terms, like that. Right? So the first 2 like this, and then the last 2 like that. And then now we're going to factor what's in common of this first group. So we notice that there's x. What's remaining is x plus 2. And then now we look here and say what's in common. Y is in common. What's left is x plus 2. And now we have 2 terms, one term plus a second term, and they each have x plus 2 in common. And so we're going to factor out x plus 2, and what remains is x plus y, like that. Okay, let's do some more examples. So here's our polynomial here. So we put the first 2 terms in a group and the other 2 terms in another group, like that. And now we're going to factor, okay, what's in common here? Y. What's remaining is x minus 3. What's in common here is 4. What remains is x minus 3, like that. And then now we have x minus 3 in common, so we're going to factor that out. And what remains is y plus 4 as such. Okay, C, another example. So first 2 terms, that's our first group. Last 2 terms, that's our second group. What's in common here? X squared. What's remaining is x plus 2. And now we have x plus 2 in common for both terms. So we're factoring out x plus 2. What remains is x squared plus 1, like that. D, first 2 terms gets grouped. Other 2 terms get grouped. Now notice here, we're doing plus this. Right? So it's x cubed plus 4x squared plus negative 3x minus 12. Right? You don't want to put the bracket around the negative. You want to include it like that. So now we're going to factor. Okay, x squared is in common. Negative 3 is in common. And then now we have x plus 4 that is in common for each term. So we're taking that out. What remains is x squared minus 3, like that. Okay, time for some practice. Practice number 1. So go ahead and factor these polynomials. Okay, we're back. So A, first 2 terms, other 2 terms like that. Notice we're including the negative within the brackets here. Factoring the first group, we have x times x plus 3. Here we have negative y in common, and what's left is x plus 3. X plus 3 is now in common. We're factoring that out. What remains is x minus y, like that. B, group our first 2 terms, group our other 2 terms, like that. What's in common is y, and what's in common is just 1. Now we have x minus 2 in common for both, so we're factoring that out. What remains is y plus 1, like that. C, first 2 terms, other 2 terms grouped like that. X squared is in common for the first 2, so we factor that out. What remains is x plus 5. Now we have x plus 5 here that we're going to factor out from each of those 2 terms. What remains is x squared plus 1, like that. D, group our first 2 terms, group the other 2 terms like that. What's in common? X squared. What remains is x minus 4. What's in common? 2. What remains? X minus 4. Now x minus 4 is in common. Factor that out. What remains is x squared plus 2. Okay, last 2 problems here. So we'll group our first 2 terms, group the other 2 terms. Notice that it's plus the negative, right? The negative is included. So we look at the first 2, we have y in common. Look at the other 2, and we have negative x in common. What remains is x plus 4 here. What remains here is also x plus 4. We now factor out x plus 4 from each of those terms. What remains is y minus x, like that. And then f, we group our first two terms, group the other two terms like that. Factor out x squared. What's left is x minus 2. Factor out negative 3. What remains is x minus 2 like that. X minus 2 is now in common, so we factor that out, and we have x squared minus 3 like that. And that's it. It's that simple. I'll see you guys in the next video.